I'm Megan Washington, 28, female. I live in a small but sunny apartment downtown, the kind with big windows that overlook the city I've dedicated my life to shaping. As an urban planner, I spent my days designing the futures of neighborhoods, but I never imagined my own future was about to be so carelessly demolished. This is the story of how my boss fired me via text while I was unconscious on a surgeon's table, and how I made sure it was the most expensive text message he ever sent. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started with the Oakwood Development Project. For our mid-sized architecture and planning firm, landing Oakwood Capital as a client was like a local band getting a record deal with a major label. They were a billion-dollar investment firm looking to build a massive, sustainable, mixed-use community on the city's neglected waterfront. It was a legacy project, the kind of thing that makes a career, and I was at the heart of it. My boss, David Miller, the head of planning, had put me forward as the lead planner. At 28, it was a huge vote of confidence. For 9 months, the Oakwood project was my life. I worked 14-hour days, weekends disappeared, and my diet consisted mostly of coffee and takeout eaten at my desk. I was the primary point of contact for the client, specifically their senior partner, a brilliant but demanding man named Robert Davis. Robert was old school. He valued precision, punctuality, and above all, integrity. We developed a strong professional rapport built on mutual respect. He knew I was the one who understood his vision down to the last detail, from the green roof specifications on the residential towers to the traffic flow models for the retail sector. David, my boss, was a different story. He was a master of delegation, particularly when it came to the hard work. He was all smiles and handshakes in client meetings, but back at the office, he was a ghost. He'd pop his head into my office, ask for a quick update, then repackage my detailed reports into a glossy summary email to the firm's partners, positioning himself as the driving force behind our success. I didn't mind at first. I was young, ambitious, and happy to be doing the work. I figured my contributions were obvious to everyone who mattered. The final presentation to the Oakwood board was scheduled for a Monday. The Friday before, we completed the final proposal, a massive 800-page document that I had personally written, designed, and collated. It contained every blueprint, every environmental impact study, every financial projection. It was my masterpiece. I sent the final, locked PDF to David and Robert Davis simultaneously, as was our protocol. The email to David had a simple subject line, Final Oakwood Proposal for Monday Presentation. I felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. That Friday evening, David called a small team meeting. Megan, phenomenal work. He said, beaming, "You've really knocked this out of the park. You're the star of this show." He told me to take the weekend off, get some rest, and come in Monday morning ready to watch him present our work to the board. It felt a bit strange that I wasn't invited to the actual presentation, but he framed it as him wanting to shield me from the high-pressure questions of the board, allowing him to take the heat. I was too exhausted to argue. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. The weekend couldn't have come sooner, not just for rest, but because I had a long, scheduled minor surgery that Monday morning, a procedure to fix a deviated septum that I'd been putting off for years. I had cleared the time off months in advance. David knew all about it. He even wished me well. "Don't you worry about a thing on Monday," he'd said with a fatherly pat on my shoulder. "Your baby is in good hands. Just focus on your recovery." The surgery was scheduled for 8:00 a.m. Monday, I was at the hospital by 6:00 a.m., nervous but ready to finally get it over with. My sister was with me, holding my personal belongings, including my phone, which I had switched to silent. The last thing I remember is the anesthesiologist telling me to count backward from 10. The world dissolved into a peaceful, dreamless black. While I was miles away in a sterile boardroom, David Miller was presenting my work, my words, my designs, my research as his own. I learned later that he had practiced the presentation all weekend, memorizing key phrases from my executive summary. He fielded questions with vague but confident, sounding answers, never once mentioning my name. The Oakwood board was impressed. Robert Davis, my direct client contact, was there. He apparently asked a couple of pointed, technical questions that David fumbled, but he managed to recover by promising to provide supplementary data later. The presentation was, by all accounts, a success. The firm was on the brink of officially securing the largest contract in its history at 10:30 a.m. While I was still in the post-op recovery room, groggy and disoriented, my phone, safely tucked away in my sister's purse, buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a text message from David Miller. She assumed it was him checking in on me, asking how the surgery went. She didn't open it. A few minutes later, another notification popped up. An email from HR, subject, your exit information. Her brow furrowed. That was strange. She ignored that one too, focusing on getting me a cup of ice chips. The text from David, sent at precisely 10:32 a.m. Read, Megan, per our conversation, this message is to confirm your termination of employment, effective immediately. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Your final paycheck and COBRA information will be mailed to you. There had been no conversation. There was no warning. I was lying in a hospital bed, still adrift in a sea of anesthesia, and my career had just been executed by a coward who couldn't even be bothered to make a phone call. He had waited until the exact moment he knew I was not only out of the office, but physically incapacitated and unreachable. He had secured the glory of the Oakwood project, and, in the same breath, cut loose the one person who could challenge his ownership of it. Later I would piece together the timeline. The presentation ended around 10:15 a.m. The board gave their verbal approval. David must have walked straight out of that meeting high on his victory and immediately contacted Sarah Chen, the HR manager, to process my termination. He likely told her I had resigned, or that they'd had a discussion on Friday. Firing someone on medical leave is legally complicated, but by framing it as a resignation or a pre-discussed departure, he was trying to sidestep the rules. The cowardice was breathtaking, but the calculated cruelty of the timing was what truly chilled me to the bone. He didn't just fire me. He waited until I was at my most vulnerable to do it, ensuring I couldn't fight back, couldn't ask questions, and couldn't even process the blow. He thought that by the time I woke up, it would be a done deal. He was wrong. I drifted back to full consciousness around 2:00 p.m. My nose was packed with gauze, my head felt like it was full of cotton, and my throat was sore from the breathing tube. My sister was sitting in a chair by the window, her expression a mixture of fury and concern. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Like I got hit by a bus. I croaked. "Did anyone from work call?" Her face tightened. "They texted," she said, her voice clipped. She handed me my phone. My vision was still a little blurry. I squinted at the screen, my thumb swiping to the messages. There it was. David's name. I read the text once, then twice, then a third time. The words swam in front of me, refusing to make sense, per our conversation. What conversation? Termination of employment, effective immediately. It felt like a prank, a cruel, tasteless joke. Then I saw the email from HR. I tapped it open. It was a form letter, cold, impersonal. It detailed the return of company property, my laptop, my key card, and confirmed my access to the company servers and email had been revoked. My stomach plunged. This wasn't a joke. This was real. A wave of nausea, completely unrelated to the anesthesia, washed over me. 9 months of my life, poured into a project with an intensity that had bordered on obsession, and this was my reward. A text message, no explanation, no decency, just a digital pink slip sent while I was unconscious. The humiliation was a physical ache, sharper than the pain in my nose. I thought about my desk, my half-watered plant, the photos of my family, all just sitting there. Had they already packed my things into a sad little cardboard box? My sister was watching me, her eyes flashing. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I don't know. I stammered, my mind a chaotic whirl of confusion and anger. I tried to think back to Friday. Had I said something wrong? Did I offend someone? There was nothing. David had been praising me, calling me a star. It didn't add up. The first instinct was pure panic. I was out of a job, my rent was due, I had hospital bills to pay, but beneath the panic, a slow, cold burn was starting to ignite. Anger. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. David hadn't just fired me, he had tried to erase me. He had used me to secure the biggest project of his career, and then disposed of me like a used-up pen. He thought I would be too groggy, too overwhelmed, too weak to do anything about it. "Hand me your laptop." I whispered to my sister. My voice was raspy, but it had a new edge to it. "Megan, you need to rest," she protested. "Now." I insisted. She hesitated, then pulled her lightweight laptop from her bag. My company email was locked, my access to the servers was gone, but David had forgotten one crucial detail. In my obsessive, all-consuming work on the Oakwood project, I had backed up every major file, every draft, and every piece of client correspondence to a personal, password-protected cloud drive. It was my insurance policy against a server crash or a lost file. I had never imagined I would need it as insurance against my own boss. Propped up against a stack of hospital pillows, with an ice pack pressed against my face, I logged into my drive. Everything was there. The hundreds of emails between me and Robert Davis, the version history of the 800-page proposal showing my name on every edit, every edition, every single page, the metadata that proved I was the sole author. And, most importantly, the original submission email I had sent to both David and Robert Davis on Friday. I was erased from the company, but my digital ghost remained, and it had receipts. The anger was becoming clearer now, solidifying into something new. Resolve, David wanted me gone, fine, but he wasn't going to get away with stealing my work. The game wasn't over, it had just begun. The next 24 hours were a blur of painkillers and furious, methodical planning. As soon as I was discharged Tuesday morning, my sister drove me home. My head was throbbing, but my mind was crystal clear. David's betrayal wasn't just a simple act of firing me, it was a calculated heist. He needed me out of the picture before I could lay claim to my work. If I had been in the office on Monday, I would have been fielding congratulations from colleagues. My name would have been inextricably linked to the Oakwood success. By firing me while I was in surgery, he created a clean break. In the official company narrative, he was the hero, and I was a footnote who had conveniently resigned at the moment of triumph. I needed to understand the why, beyond just pure greed. What was his motive for being so ruthless? I started by reviewing my emails on the cloud drive, focusing on my correspondence with David over the past few months. A pattern emerged. He was always asking for summaries, for bullet points, for top-line takeaways. He never engaged with the technical details. He managed up, not down. His communications with the firm's partners were full of I and my team, while his instructions to me were all you and your responsibility. Then I found it. An email chain from about 6 months ago. One of the firm's senior partners had emailed David asking for a detailed analysis of a zoning variance for the Oakwood project. David forwarded the email to me with a one-line instruction: "Megan, handle this." I had spent 3 days compiling a complex 20-page report, which I sent back to David. He replied, "Thanks." An hour later, he forwarded my report to the partner, but with a new cover note: "Here's the analysis I've been working on. Let me know if you have any questions." He had presented my work as his own verbatim. It wasn't the first time, I now realized, but it was the most blatant example. This confirmed my suspicion. David was an empty suit. He had the title and the salary, but he didn't have the skills. The Oakwood project was too big, too complex for him to manage genuinely. He needed me to do the actual work, but he couldn't afford to let anyone know that. His ego, and likely his entire career at the firm, was built on this facade. The next piece of the puzzle was the HR manager, Sarah Chen. I knew Sarah to be a stickler for process. She wouldn't just fire someone on medical leave via a text message without some serious pressure or deception from David. I guessed he had lied to her, probably telling her I had resigned on Friday, and the text was just a formality we had agreed upon. To an overworked HR manager juggling 100 things, it might have seemed plausible enough to just process the paperwork. But the most critical person in all of this was Robert Davis, the client. David could fool his bosses, who only saw the glossy summaries, but he couldn't fool the man to whom I had spoken almost daily for 9 months. Robert knew who did the work. He was the one who had called my cell at 10 p.m. to discuss the nuances of permeable paving materials. He was the one who had praised my unparalleled attention to detail in an email just last week, an email I now saw David had not been copied on. David's plan had a fatal flaw. He controlled the narrative inside the firm, but he didn't control the narrative with the client. He assumed Robert Davis wouldn't care who did the work as long as it got done. He underestimated Robert's value of integrity, and he critically underestimated our professional relationship. Firing me wasn't just about taking credit, it was about silencing the one person who could expose him to the most important client they had ever had. My resolve hardened. David thought he had cut me out. He didn't realize he had just cut me loose, and a person with nothing left to lose is a very dangerous thing. By Tuesday evening, my plan was set. It was simple, direct, and relied on one thing, the truth. I wasn't going to sue for wrongful termination, at least not yet. A lawsuit would be slow, costly, and would get bogged down in legal arguments. David and the firm would have expensive lawyers who could tie me up in knots for years. My leverage wasn't in the law, it was in the $1 billion contract that was still waiting to be signed. They had the verbal agreement, but I knew from my talks with Robert Davis that the final ink wasn't dry. The official signing was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. That gave me a very small window. I spent hours crafting a single email. It had to be perfect, professional, factual, and devastating. I wasn't going to be emotional or accusatory. I was going to be a planner, laying out the facts with cold, hard precision. The recipient was Robert Davis. I would copy the firm's 2 senior partners and Sarah Chen from HR. Putting them all on the same email would prevent them from controlling the information or conferring on a response. They would all see it at the same time. The subject line was meticulously chosen, follow-up regarding the Oakwood development project and my departure. The email began politely. I congratulated him on the board's approval of the proposal and expressed my continued belief in the project's vision. This was to remind him of our shared goal and my deep involvement. The second paragraph was the payload. I wrote, as my last official act before my employment was terminated yesterday morning, I wanted to ensure you had the final, fully detailed project file with all supporting data. The comprehensive 800-page proposal presented on Monday was the culmination of my 9 months of work as lead planner, and I remain incredibly proud of the result. Here I use the key phrases "my last official act, terminated yesterday morning," and "my 9 months of work" to draw a direct line between my firing and the project's success. Then came the evidence. I continued to that end. I have attached a link to a secure cloud drive. This folder contains the complete project history, including all milestone drafts, the full unedited metadata for the final proposal confirming authorship, and our complete email correspondence which details the evolution of the project's core concepts. I felt it was vital for the project's integrity that your team has access to the unvarnished source material, especially for the complex technical questions that may arise during the implementation phase. This was the checkmate move. I wasn't just claiming the work was mine. I was providing an irrefutable, time-stamped digital archive that proved it. I was also subtly pointing out that David, the man who would now be their sole point of contact, did not possess this level of granular knowledge and would be useless when real problems arose. I was positioning myself as essential to the project's future success, even in my absence. I ended the email on a professional, slightly melancholic note. It was an absolute privilege working with you, Robert. I wish you and Oakwood Capital the utmost success with this landmark development. I am confident it will reshape our city for the better. I reread the email 20 times. It was perfect. It never once said, David stole my work. It didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. It was a corporate kill shot wrapped in the politeness of a farewell note. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. There was no going back. I took a deep breath, the air whistling slightly through my bandaged nose, and I clicked. The email shot out into the digital ether at 7:00 a.m. Wednesday morning, just as the key players would be starting their day. Now all I could do was wait. The silence that followed was deafening. For 3 hours, my phone remained quiet. My email inbox was empty. I started to second. Guess myself. Had I miscalculated? Had Robert Davis just deleted the email, dismissing it as sour grapes from a disgruntled ex-employee? Was the firm already in damage control, crafting a legal threat to shut me down? The anxiety was a knot in my stomach. Then at 10:15 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. I answered, my heart pounding. Is this Megan Washington? The voice was calm, professional, and instantly recognizable. It was Sarah Chen, the HR manager. Her tone was completely different from the cold, impersonal HR emails. It was strained. Yes, this is Megan, I said, keeping my own voice steady. Megan. She began, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. We have received your email. The senior partners and I would like to speak with you immediately. David Miller will also be on the line. Can you join a conference call in 5 minutes? This was it. The moment of confrontation. I can, I replied. She gave me the dial-in details and hung up. I took a few deep breaths, centered myself, and dialed in. The virtual room was silent for a moment before one of the senior partners, a man I barely knew, spoke. Megan, thank you for joining us. We are all on the line. We want to understand the situation. Before I could answer, David's voice, tight with rage, cut in. The situation is that a disgruntled former employee is making baseless accusations to sabotage a client relationship. I made no accusations, David, I said calmly. I sent a project archive to the client to ensure a smooth transition. Everything in my email was factual. There was a pause. Sarah Chen spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension. David, Robert Davis called us an hour ago. He was extremely concerned. He postponed this afternoon's signing. He said the project's integrity is paramount, and he wants full clarity on the project's management and authorship before proceeding. The silence that followed that statement was heavy. David's entire house of cards was wobbling. The $1 billion contract was on hold because of my email. He specifically referenced his technical questions from Monday's meeting. Sarah continued, her voice like ice. He said Mr. Miller's responses were vague and that he now understands why. He asked if the person who was the actual author of the proposal was still with the firm. David started to sputter. This is ridiculous. I led this project from day one. She was a junior planner who provided support. This was my moment. Is that why my name is on every single draft in the version history? I asked, my voice even. Is that why my email is on hundreds of exchanges with Robert, hashing out the details you were never involved in? Is that why you texted to fire me while I was literally unconscious on a surgery table? Because you were afraid I'd show up on Tuesday and get the credit I deserved? I could almost hear the blood draining from David's face. The other partners were silent, the gears in their heads turning as they processed the enormous financial and reputational risk that was unfolding. They didn't care about what was fair to me. They cared about the contract. Sarah Chen took control. David, I think it's best if you remain silent for the rest of this call. Her tone was no longer that of a colleague, but of an executioner. Megan, she said, turning her attention back to me. Mr. Davis made his position very clear. He has trust in you and the work you've done. He is uncomfortable moving forward without you being involved. The partners have discussed this. We would like to open a conversation about your immediate reinstatement. I let the offer hang in the air. Reinstatement, back to the same desk, the same office, with the man who had so callously betrayed me just down the hall. Absolutely not. Sarah, I said finally. I appreciate the offer, but my professional relationship with David, and frankly with a firm that would allow this to happen, is irreparably damaged. I don't think reinstatement is a viable path forward. Then what do you want? One of the partners asked, the desperation clear in his voice. And that's when I laid out my terms. It wasn't about a job anymore. It was about justice. My terms were simple and non-negotiable. First, David Miller was to be terminated immediately for cause. Specifically for gross professional misconduct and misrepresentation of work. His departure was to be announced internally, stating the reasons clearly to ensure this kind of credit. Stealing culture was stopped in its tracks. Second, I was not coming back to the firm. Instead, I would be hired directly by Oakwood Capital as an independent consultant for the first phase of the project. My role would be to oversee the integrity of the original plan, acting as the bridge between the client and the firm. My consulting fee would be equivalent to 2 years of my former salary, plus a project completion bonus. This would give me financial security and the professional position I deserved. Third, the firm would issue a formal, written apology to me, acknowledging my sole authorship of the Oakwood proposal. They would also provide me with a severance package equivalent to 1 full year's salary, covering the 9 months of overtime and emotional distress. This was separate from my new consulting contract, and finally Sarah Chen, the HR manager, would be the one to personally call me and confirm when David Miller had been escorted from the building. The partners on the call were silent. I had them backed into a corner, and we all knew it. The alternative was losing the biggest contract in their history and facing a massive lawsuit from both me and potentially Oakwood Capital for fraud and misrepresentation. My demands, while significant, were a bargain compared to the alternative. We need to discuss this internally. One partner stammered. You have 1 hour, I said. Robert Davis is waiting for an update. I'm sure you don't want to keep him waiting longer. Then I disconnected the call. 48 hours after I woke up in a hospital bed to a nightmare text message, my life had been turned upside down and back again. The call came 2 minutes later. It was Sarah Chen. Hello, Megan, she said. Her voice was tired but respectful. We agree to all your terms. The contracts for your consultancy and severance are being drafted by our lawyers as we speak. They will be sent to you within the hour. There was a short pause. And David? I asked. I'm standing outside his office now. She said quietly, Security is with me. He's packing his things. A wave of relief, so profound it almost made my knees buckle, washed over me. I had won. It wasn't a loud, screaming victory, but a quiet, decisive one. I had used my work, my professionalism, and my integrity as a weapon against those who had none. The next few months were a whirlwind. I signed the contract with Oakwood Capital and started my new role. Working directly with Robert Davis was a dream. He treated me as a respected partner, and together we ensured the project stayed true to the vision I had poured my heart into. The firm I left behind had to hire 3 senior planners to replace the work I had been doing alone, and they were now accountable to me, their former junior colleague. The irony was not lost on me. David Miller disappeared from the industry. With a firing like that on his record, no reputable firm would touch him. Today, 2 years later, the first phase of the Oakwood development is complete. The new waterfront is beautiful, a vibrant mix of green spaces, elegant buildings, and thriving public squares. Sometimes I walk down there on my lunch break and just look at it all. I see the curve of a pathway I designed, the placement of a park bench I argued for. It's real. It's my legacy. I didn't just get my career back. I built a new one, stronger and more resilient than before, on my own terms. And it all started with one perfectly crafted $1 billion email.